than you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So I'll get goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you make the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 5. Thanks for joining me. Go to inallairness.com for show notes and plenty more features. The social hub for the podcast is facebook.com/inallairness. If you haven't already, please like the page and join the growing community of fans. Add the podcast to your RSS feed or iTunes so you never miss another show. It's also available on Stitcher, BlackBerry, Player FM, TuneIn Radio and numerous other podcatchers. I love hearing from listeners. On either site, you can send voicemail comments or questions. With your permission, I'd love to include your feedback on future episodes. You can follow me on Twitter @InAllAirness. My guest today is a 3-time Olympian, 3-time NBA champion of the Chicago Bulls, a member of Basketball Australia's Hall of Fame, and the first Australian to ever play in the NBA. Luc Longley, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Well, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Do you remember the first time you were actually exposed to the game of basketball?
Well, my mum and dad actually met in a basketball stadium. I think it was Albert Park. Andrew Gaze would probably be able to confirm that. He's that old. But, so I was a product of a basketball family. So I grew up around. I've got photos of me bouncing the ball when I was a kid. But, basketball was really well and truly in its infancy then. That's my wife making a coffee in the background. So I wanted to play rugby. I don't know why I didn't want to play AFL because that's bigger here, but I played rugby league when I was a kid. And I think I first joined a basketball team when I was around 12 or even 13, reasonably old, I suppose, by a lot of people's standards.
No doubt. Now, your parents were both former Olympians, if I've done my research correctly. What impact have they had on your sporting life?
Yeah, neither of them were Olympians. Dad missed out twice. If you let him tell it was because of injuries, but we don't really know why. And Mum was never quite at that level, but they both played for state, and I think Dad definitely played for Australia on a number of occasions, and I'm not sure about Mum, but my dad's 6'10", Mum's 6'4", they're both good athletes. So I suppose having them be athletic and be active was a big influence for sure, and just growing up, rolling down the basketball stadium stairs and all those sort of sights and sounds of smells of basketball have always been familiar and like home. In fact, I'll diverge a little bit. When my oldest daughter was born, she had been conceived right at the beginning of a basketball season, and so she spent her whole time at basketball games when she was in her mum's womb, and the only thing she'd ever watch on television when she was brand new was basketball. It was the only sound she recognised on TV. You had a basketball game on, she'd try to look at it, but anything else she just ignored it. So I think those sounds as a young kid must have some sort of impact.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's a good story, that one. In 1986, before you headed stateside to play college basketball, you played a couple of games for the Perth Wildcats in Australia's NBL. Can you just talk about Perth for a moment and Western Australia in general and its obvious importance to you?
Yeah, I actually never played in the NBL. I played 2 exhibition games for the Wildcats against the Boomers.
Oh, okay.
And my heroes sort of as a young basketballer were Larry Senstock and Ray Borner. They were the prototype big men. And I got to play against them, and that made me, that woke me up a little bit, but also made me feel pretty good. Mm-hmm. From a basketball point of view, I grew up at the old Perry Lakes. My old man was on the first sort of Wildcats teams. I was actually an Orange Cutter water boy on the first Wildcats teams. So, yeah, it's my basketball home, obviously, but more than that, it's where all my family are, and I'm living there now, and I've always wanted to raise my kids back in Perth. It's a growing city. It's not it's not dynamic sort of Chicago style city or even Melbourne, but it's certainly home, and I'm fond of it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, I did read just in your book, and it's a great read, by the way, Running with the Bulls, about the story you mentioned where you were a ball boy and wiping the courts up with that big broom where you took a tumble, and one of the Alice boys saw you do it, and you relayed a great story back about how you got revenge on him when you were about 7 feet tall and he was about 6'3" when it came to one of the SBL finals.
Yeah, that was one of those moments. they used to torment me with "Got Your Mind Right, Luke?" from what's the name of the movie with Paul Newman in it? Cool Hand Luke.
Cool Hand Luke.
And I didn't know that was cool at that stage. I thought he was just torturing me. So when I got to measure up against him as an 18-year-old who was sort of in my full prime, really, at that age, and he was jumping centre at 6'4", I got to deliver the "Got Your Mind Right, Glenn?" So I really enjoyed. I don't, probably didn't mean as much to him as it did to me, but it was good value.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you represented Australia at 3 Olympic Games. My favourite team that I saw you playing was the one at home here in Sydney in 2000, and I was really fortunate to be there at the game against Russia, where Andrew Gaze hit a massive three-pointer in the closing stages there in a must-win game at that point in the tournament. What memories do you have of your time with the Boomers and your relationship with greats of the game here in Australia like Andrew Gaze, Shane Hill, Mark Bradke and Andrew Vlahoff?
Yeah, look, I didn't have the NBA in my sights when I was a young basketballer, and used to really, when I was young, I remember the first posters I ever saw was Moses Malone and a Julius Erving one, and they were the only ones. Oh, Magic Johnson too. Converse had a few posters out, but there was no internet, there was no magazines. So, Australian basketball was it. And as I said before, Larry and Ray were sort of my heroes. And then by the time I was 17, I was bigger than all the kids my age, and I sort of got involved with our national programs early. And that really became, and I said recently in a Boomers documentary, that became my fraternity, if you like. I grew up in the Boomers. I grew up in our junior national teams with Vlahoff, Bradke, Hill, those guys. Not so much Gaze, he was 30 or 40 years older, seemed like. But then once I got to the national program, obviously Andrew was a stalwart there. I grew up in them, and I used to love coming back and playing. I was upsetting to me to miss Atlanta because that would have been 4, and that was a good chance to get a medal. I used to love coming back and playing with those guys, and that was, it's sort of my basketball breeding ground, my basketball comfort zone, if you like. In fact, when I first got to the NBA, I was having a crap time because I was on a bad team and no one shared the ball, no one really cared about each other, and that wasn't the kind of Boomers basketball that I'd grown up in, and I found it a bit of a shock to start with, but obviously the move to Chicago resolved that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll get to that very shortly. I just wanted to quickly touch on your time at the University of New Mexico with the Lobos. Can you perhaps talk about how you initially were recruited and just about a bit of your time at New Mexico and what you can remember fondly?
Yeah, mate, well, I remember most of it fondly. I got recruited there because Andrew Vlahoff went to high school over in Oregon. That's right. He went to Oregon, and a couple of schools came over to see him and saw me by accident, including New Mexico and Hawaii. In hindsight, I have no idea why I didn't choose Hawaii, because at that stage I was into the beach and being a Perth kid. Sure. I think it might have been a flash of common sense, where I knew if I'd gone to Hawaii I might have got distracted, whereas New Mexico there was less distractions. Yeah. And the coach there was pretty charming at that time. When you're a young bloke getting recruited, the coach has a big impact on that. So I went there and had a slow first year. I was, young and not very confident. And the last couple of games of my freshman year, I busted out and had big games and was dunking on people. I don't even know what happened or why. It just happened that way. Then they fired the coach, Gary Colson, at the end of that year. And I actually considered coming back and playing for the Wildcats or maybe transferring. And New Mexico recruited me hard again a second time. And I stayed, and their recruiting pitch was, we'll get you the ball every time down the floor, and that's exactly what they did. I was really the making of me as a basketballer, because until that, having grown up as a young bloke on national teams and stuff, I was always a facilitator, and suddenly they wanted me to be the man. So I was forced to, against my nature, shoot the ball a lot and have a big role and a big responsibility on those Lobos teams. And we didn't get very deep into playoffs. We got the NCAA playoffs my senior year, which was the first time in 13 years. So I felt like I helped to drag that program back into significance, and it's going well now. The Pit's a great venue, 18,000 people in an underground stadium. I still don't think I've ever had a roar from a crowd quite like you do in the Pit, because it's just a special place. I took my family back there recently, and the kids and my wife all got goosebumps. Just they stood me up and gave me a bit of a round of applause, because I haven't been back there much, and it's got just a great energy. And college crowds are, in a lot of ways, the most authentic basketball crowds I think there are. The players are still amateur. The university kids are there. It's not full of skyboxes. It's usually a very intimate arena. I loved my years at college. In fact, in many ways, obviously with the exception of some highlights with the Bulls and that sort of thing, I think those are probably my most fun times on court.
Okay, excellent. That's good to hear. Now, playing at New Mexico, you actually had a couple of triple-doubles. To this day, I believe you might have been the only University of New Mexico player to do so. I noticed in one of those games you dished out 10 assists, so perhaps you maybe should have been running the point in the NBA.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because someone told me that the other day and I didn't even know that. So there you go. I was never really much into the stats and still to this day, if you ask me what my points and rebounds were, I struggle to remember. So someone actually in another interview asked me about my triple-doubles the other day and I didn't think I'd even had any. So I'm stoked to learn that later in life.
No, that's always a good thing to fall back on to show that you could also pass the ball. Because obviously you're a great passer in the NBA, but to know that you dished out 10 assists in your college years, also very nice.
Yeah, well, in the NBA, you've got guys like MJ and Scotty. You can pretty much throw it up there and they're going to make you look good, whereas in college you've got to be a bit more on the money.
No doubt. Now, just speaking of your stats very quickly, I had a look on Basketball Reference, one of my favourite sites I like to look at, and from your sophomore through to senior year, you averaged about 17 points, 9 boards and 3 assists a game. So there's some really solid numbers, which obviously held you in good stead when you went into the 91 NBA draft.
Yeah, I certainly, my game was working in college. I was bigger and ended up being, stronger than most of the guys in college. And it was really, it was an unfair advantage I was working with. So, if I didn't get 17 and 9 and 3, should be a couple of blocks in there too somewhere, I don't know. If I didn't get that, then I would have been something wrong. That didn't really translate my first year in Minnesota, which I'm sure you're going to get to next.
No, I will get to that. I must have left the blocks out because obviously being the big man you are, you would have got probably 3 or 4 a game, I'm sure, back in college days. But yeah, the mighty impressive numbers there. So speaking of the 1991 NBA draft, you were taken at pick 7 by the Timberwolves. Your early NBA career proved to be a pretty tough situation, obviously. You're on an expansion team, you were losing quite regularly, and you had a couple of head coach changes. How was the daily grind for you, being a rookie in the NBA and trying to get up and get ready for those games with the T-Wolves?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much to tell you about that because it really wasn't very, very much fun at all. It should have been the highlight of my life. I'd made it to the NBA, I was making good money, but all that stuff really didn't mean anything. I was playing with a bunch of guys that mostly I didn't really get on with very well on the court anyway. I didn't feel like it was a fit. I had a long break between college and getting to Minnesota with a contract dispute, so I didn't come in on top of my game and got off to a bad start, and I take full responsibility for all that. But the wash was that I had a crap first and part of second year while I sort of adjusted to the NBA. My turnaround jump shot, which was my money move in college, was suddenly ending up in the third row. I couldn't get to my little jump hook because I was just getting muscled off it. I was still getting the offensive boards and getting a few blocks, but in college I was able to run on most big guys, believe it or not. I would get out in transition, and in the NBA suddenly I'm trying to keep up with David Robinson and Hakeem Olajuwon. Felt like I was running in mud, professionally and personally and in every other way. Those were bleak times, and I had to go back and I see Kevin McHale, an old Celtics player you might know of. He arrived back in Minnesota having retired from the Celtics, and we spent a summer. We went up and stayed at his cabin in Minnesota, up in the woods, and sort of looked at tape and got on the court and sort of just rejigged my game and got me going again. And when I work with young players now, I think a lot of it's about giving them things to hang their hats on, giving them confidence, and that's what Kevin did with me. He really just sort of gave me my feet again and showed me the parts of my game that were good and the broken bits he tried to fix, and more than anything, just someone in your corner. And so from there, that next season, I started to play very well, and we started to win a few more games. By that stage, Jack McCloskey had come in as a GM, and I was the only non-Jack guy on the squad. So I was pretty sure I was going to get traded, and I was right.
Yeah, traded, as he was nicknamed.
That's right, traded Jack. You're all over it.
Yeah, no, I am. We'll talk about a few brighter times, perhaps. In February 1994, you were traded to the Chicago Bulls. From an expansion team to a franchise that was gunning for its 4th consecutive championship. I can't imagine a greater culture shock when you walked into the Verdo Center, I guess. Yeah,
it was like a rebirth in that suddenly I felt that feeling again of a team of guys that cared. We got on the basketball court and the stretching was done with intent. The drills were done crisply. The coaches didn't take any shortcuts. We got on the court and we executed things. We played team defense, all those things that I didn't realise I was missing in Minnesota as much because there wasn't the culture there. Suddenly the culture of the Bulls, and it just felt like arriving at home. I fitted straight in. I think I learned the triangle in 2 days. I went home and I got, all the coins out on the breakfast table, and I couldn't have a cup of coffee, or I never watched TV, but I certainly didn't those first few days in Chicago. I was shuffling coins around the table and going through scenarios in my head. And in fact, Phil will tell you, I made a few reads out of the triangle in that first week that they ended up being things that we did that I hadn't been doing just because I was so into it. I was so excited to play in a team offense again. And play that style of basketball. I was like a kid in a candy store. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. It was the greatest bit of fortune I've ever had.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. And you can tell in your voice just now how, even thinking about it some, 18 years ago or whenever it was, that you can still recall it like it was just yesterday. So that's great. So as a key member of the Chicago Bulls starting lineup, you had to defend some incredible players, arguably the greatest era of big men the league's ever seen. Patrick Ewing, Keem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Dikembe Mutombo, Shaq, Alonzo Mourning, all those names spring to mind. Can you talk about some of the battles you had with these greats of the game and how you managed to build up your strength and also your conditioning in Chicago to obviously help you with that big load going forwards?
Yeah, look, there's some good names in there, and some of the ones that you've left out that are, there's Moses Malone was still in the league when I first got in the league. There's a handful of other, every team seemed to have, what was his name from Cleveland? Brad Doherty.
Oh, Brad Doherty, of course, the ex-North Carolina guy, yeah, sure.
Yeah, there was some great guys bouncing around the league. Certainly I had to, when I got to Chicago, Phil's first meeting with me, he said, "You're here because we need someone who can hold the post and who can defend." And so I got with the strength guys and we set out a program which went through the season. But really that first off season was where I did big work, mostly Olympic lifting staff. I found a local guy here in Perth who was a very keen lifter. He was more of he used to do the world's strongest man competitions. That was his deal. So we'd go and, tow tires up sand hills and do all that sort of stuff. And I just got into it and I put on about 15, 20 pounds. It slowed me down a little bit, and it took my jump from 6 inches to 5 inches. But it made me much more effective in the post, and I was able to deal with guys like Shaq anyway as effectively as anyone else. Certainly he still had his moments. But really defending those guys was about strength, but it was more about watching video. I got right into watching the video and just deciding which ways to turn them and where not to let them get the ball and all that scouting stuff, which I had never done before in my career. I just went out and played ball and thought I was all right at it. But once I started having to guard those guys, it was really about mapping their game and trying to take things away from them and being strategic about it. And I'd like to take a lot of credit for guarding those guys, but when you've got Scottie Pippen, MJ and Ron Harper digging from the weak side and digging down off the ball and coming from the back weak side for block shots, it does tend to slow those guys up a little bit with their moves and makes them a little more hesitant, and then you can start crowding them and pushing them around. So our defensive unit was very much about that. It wasn't like I was down there just wrestling by myself. It was a tag team.
Yeah, sure. And there was also a pretty handy guy by the name of Dennis Rodman as well, which I'll get to in a moment. But he was obviously very helpful as well when they'd be the Dobermans up front, but you'd have Rodman behind as well, adding a bit of support.
How could I forget Dennis?
Well, I'll get to him shortly, and also your relationship with him. Now, in your book, Running with the Bulls, you write about Michael Jordan's return to the NBA back in March of '95. You were already the man in the middle for the Bulls at the time. Can you just talk about some of the practice sessions that MJ had with the team before he announced his return and just some of the craziness that was going on around the Bulls at that time, please, Luke?
Yeah, as you'll find out through this interview, that my memory's selective and vague, but I'll do my best.
That's okay.
I think there was only 2 or 3 practices. He was around one day. I hadn't even seen him since he stopped playing, and then he was around one day and taken some shots but didn't practice with the team. And the next day he decided to practice with us, and one of the guys said, "I think he might be coming back to play." No way, wouldn't that be good? But nah. And then the next day he pretty much told us and announced it the same day. So we weren't really in the know, and I kind of feel like maybe Michael didn't really know as clearly himself until he made the decision. But Michael being Michael, I'll take that back. He probably had thought it out pretty thoroughly, but it seemed to me like he was, seemed to me like it was pretty quick. Us around it was, we went from being a team with a decent amount of media exposure and a solid following to being rock and roll team, going into hotels through the basement, through the kitchen, having to use aliases at hotels and travel with security guards. And that was a whole other level of things that I hadn't experienced. And Michael brought all that, obviously, to the team. He was the rock star of the league, if not sports, at that stage. Now, I don't need to tell you, I'm preaching to the choir, but he had a lot going on, a lot of charisma, a lot of mystique. I think almost more than charisma. And even amongst his teammates, I didn't really know the bloke at all. I was just trying to keep up with him.
Yeah, sure. Now, speaking of aliases there, I'll just take a quick segue for a minute. You mentioned in your book a great story about one of the times you checked into a hotel. I think it was during the 96 finals, and you went under the name Bruce Doull, who is obviously a former, for Australian fans, they'll probably know who Bruce Doull is. He was a great Australian rules football player. Back in the VFL days, it was playing for Carlton. It would have been quite amusing, I guess, some of the looks on the faces of people when you were checking in as somebody that they'd never heard of, but they might have twigged, hang on, isn't that Luc Longley?
Yeah, they were expecting aliases, but they certainly blanked me. I had no idea who Bruce Doull was. Another alias I used, which I used to get equally disappointing responses, was Norman Gunston. I was Norman Gunston a lot. A few other ones, but my Aussie mates tended to appreciate it more than anybody else.
No, I can imagine that. My grandfather played for Carlton back in the 1940s. He played in the 1945 Bloodbath. I've got a big link to Carlton, and when I read that you're a Blues fan growing up, that just made it even better that I was chatting to you as well. I know you're a Freo man now, though. Yeah, I am, mate, I am. But I do hope one day that Bruce hears that I've been using him as an alias. I thought he was a legend. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Now, the 1996 NBA season, it was record-setting for many reasons. Your Bulls stampeded to a 72-10 record in the regular season. Before we talk playoffs and finals, what do you recall about the regular season and the drive to 70 wins in general? Yeah, mate, I remember bits and pieces about it, obviously. I remember walking onto the court a lot of times and having, for the first time in my career, seeing teams that already looked defeated, seeing guys, in the first quarter seemed like they just already knew they were going to lose. I remember strangling teams with our defence more than killing them with our offence. I don't know the stats, and I hope maybe you can dig some up, but I would suspect that if you look at, everyone remembers the triangle, and remember Michael's big shots, and obviously my powerful dunks in traffic. True. But what I remember, and I actually think the greatest part of our team was our defence, and I think statistically, if you actually examine that, you might find that that's true. I think I know that we went for quarters where we'd hold teams to sort of 10 points in quarters, and these are in important games. Teams would think they were with us, and suddenly we'd change a couple of things up and start bringing traps from the baseline, which people weren't doing at that stage, and just sort of turn the screws on teams that thought they were pretty good. And even in playoffs, we did it with Seattle, and I think we had a couple of pretty good quarters against Utah by memory. That's what I remember about that 72-10 team. More than anything, I remember going out there and thinking, these blokes can't score against us. They really don't know what to do. I remember seeing coaches scratching their heads, guys coming off the court kicking benches, just frustration from opponents at the stranglehold we had on them. I also remember just having this feeling that we were doing something special, and that we were going to be around for a while. We're all getting to know each other still, so there was obviously a lot of upside. Dennis was, every game he seemed to get more rebounds and more excited, and his cult following was getting bigger and bigger. And my fan demographic was growing. I didn't tend to be old ladies or 10-year-old girls. That was my fan demographic. Dennis got everything in between. But we felt it. But obviously, actually, we were 72-10. But I think, and you'll be able to tell me this, but I think the last 8 or 10 games we lost 2 or 3 because we started resting guys. And I often joke with Phil that was a mistake, but Phil doesn't make mistakes, so I must be. No, that's true, because he did drop a couple in the last sort of 10 or so, and I think there might have been a 1-point loss in there as well somewhere, but
Charlotte
2-10. Yeah, Charlotte.
To Charlotte in Chicago.
Yeah.
There's a memory blip for you.
Yeah.
And they were a crap team at that stage.
Yeah, no, you had, I think in that final play against Charlotte, there was maybe 4 or 5 attempts at the rim. Like, Kukoc was and there's offensive boards a go, and just couldn't get it in the basket there to get the win. So that was a bit of a disappointing loss, I can imagine, when you had such an amazing regular season.
Still, it's a nice round number, isn't it? 72 and 10. It kind of rolls off the tongue nicely.
Oh, it does indeed. I'd love to have been a part of it, but just watching it from afar over here, can't get enough of it even these days. Now let's talk about the playoffs, the 96 playoffs. The Bulls swept an up-and-coming Miami Heat team. You knocked off arch rivals, the New York Knicks, and then you took care of business against the Orlando Magic, sweeping Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway. The only loss that you guys had in the Eastern Conference run was an overtime defeat against the New York Knicks in round 2. What do you sort of remember about the steamroll effect that your Bulls had of that playoff run leading up to the 96 finals?
Yeah, mate, I just remember an inevitability about what we were doing. I remember being amazed at how much work we were putting in, the preparation from the coaching staff, the focus of the guys. And in my first playoff run, and I wasn't leading that. I was just in the mix. I was watching and learning and soaking it up, and the guys that, the coaching staff and the older guys that were leading the team, just the level of application and focus. I remember just thinking this is a bulletproof. Unless someone gets injured, this is a pretty bulletproof little chemistry thing we had going on, because we were leaving no box unticked. We were preparing for things the other team hadn't even thought about yet. We seemed to always be on the front foot, and we always seemed to have an answer for everything. People would come out and press us, and we would have designed not just a press breaker, but a press attacker, a fast break play against the press, and so they'd pull it off in 2 plays because we'd have scored 4 points. It was that sort of feeling of just being on the front foot, and it was never that good again because we'd already done it. The next 2 championships were repeating the same formula. I suppose if you're a businessman, it'd be like having your first success and then franchising. I don't know the good analogy, but that first championship that I was involved in was just one of those things where, as it unfolded, it was just magic.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, the 1996 finals, I love that series. It was a fantastic matchup. I'm sure it holds a very important part in your heart. Now, Gary Payton and Sean Kemp's Seattle Supersonics took on the might of the Chicago Bulls. You had a great start to the series in Game 1. I think you averaged about 12 or 13 points for the whole series, but Game 1 you had 14 points and four blocks. In your first finals game, what do you remember about the build-up to the game, the result, and having the one-up start in the series?
Yeah, the build-up, I remember just the level of fan attention. I thought we're getting media attention. I thought we were getting a lot of attention. But we got to that first game, and you literally had to stay on court after practice, and the whole court was filled with media. And they were broken up into countries. There was the Japanese media, and there was 200 of them, and then there was the Chinese media. And you basically just did the global tour of media. It took an hour and a half after practice. It was full on and fun too. And then it was to work. And I, you know enough about me, and I'm enough of a realist to know that Sean Kemp was a major challenge for me. He's fast on his feet, explosive. And I was not particularly fast on my feet or explosive. So I had to find ways to keep him, to corner him, push him towards baselines, keep him on the ground, foul him, frustrate him, that sort of thing. And I remember sitting down with Dennis after a couple of practices and talking about what we were going to do, and because he had to tag team with me, obviously. And I think Sean had a couple of games where he sort of got away from us a bit, but I remember that first game going into it thinking, what am I in for? Sean Kemp at play of intensity, didn't know what to expect, and I just remember at the end of that game going, okay, we can get this, we can handle this. This isn't so bad, and feeling pretty proud of myself, as you can tell.
Yeah, no, it's sensational to hear. Now, in Game 3 of those finals, you had 19 points and 2 blocks alongside a guy named Michael Jordan, who had 36 points, 3 boards, 5 assists, and a couple of steals, and your Bulls went up 3-0. I'm sure you have fond recollections of that game. Do you think that was your best game as a pro?
Well, it depends how you measure it. Candidly, the reason I had 19 points is that Seattle decided they had to change something up, and they started leaving me to double team. And I was getting left in the rotations, and instead of standing, I was cutting the basket and getting layups. And I scored some out of the post, but I always get my 6 or 8 points out of the post. Yep. But certainly it was one of the best games as a pro, yeah. And in terms of profile and all that, it was probably the making of me in many ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be able to do that in an NBA Finals game, and you're also playing at Seattle, so obviously that's a massive achievement in itself.
Yeah, mate, I was very proud. But in the playoffs and in the NBA and in individual games, I remember always being. It's now that you look back at that stuff and go, yeah, that was great. But while you're doing it, and you don't really. I didn't find myself sitting down and going, wow, that was great the next day or that day. Mm-hmm. It was maybe after the playoffs were finished, and then a bit as you go later in life. At the time, it just seemed like what needed to be done, and we almost expected it. We were feeling so good about ourselves.
Yeah, sure. Now, you alluded to this a moment ago, but you're a three-time NBA champion. Can you describe how it felt to win that first title back in 1996?
Yeah, people ask me what my favourite basketball moment was, and it's a little bit embarrassing to say that I wasn't on the court for it. I was on the sideline because we had Seattle in the bag pretty much, and I remember there was a couple of minutes left on the clock, and I was on the bench with pretty much, I think I might have even had ice on my knees, watching the clock wind down and sort of doing the maths and figuring out if they had a chance to even come close. And once we got under a minute, that feeling, the crowd started to stand up the ones that were still sitting down by then they were standing up. Yep. And everything just started to buzz and I just remember that really vividly. And then when the siren went, I think Michael grabbed the ball and fell over, and Randy jumped on him, and I still remember that very clearly as the most exciting moment I've ever had. I was just once you're a world champion, you're always a world champion, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. Not that I know anything about it, but from afar, definitely you are. Now, Dennis Rodman, we mentioned his name a little bit earlier. An entire episode could probably be devoted to the Worm, and I'd love to speak to him one day. I'd like to ask you about your relationship with him. How was it when he was an opponent of yours in comparison to the strong bond that you developed as teammates when you were both in Chicago?
Yeah, I didn't have much to do with him when he was an opponent other than, trying to keep him off the boards. And I remember how sweaty he was. He used to just, like he had a shower every 2 minutes on the court. He was such a unit physically. Yeah. And it's hard to block out a guy who's that sweaty because it's hard to grab him or anything. You can't cheat,
Yeah.
I remember that. And then, but not much else. He was a bit of an enigma, a bit of a crazy, but there's plenty of those in the NBA, He really got his best crazy going once he got to the Bulls, though. He really he honed his crazy to a scream. And my bond with him was very much sort of started on the court. He was, I spoke to him the other day, actually. He has a radio show in LA, and he called me up for the radio show, and I joked with him that I led the league in rebound assists that year. Or every year I played with him because I was always boxing out 2 or 3 guys while he ran around in circles and picked up all the rebounds. Yeah, and I thought that was a bit rude. But I did feel like our relationship was based on me smashing as many bodies as I could, and Dennis going and getting the rebound. And then I ended up partying with him a little bit. But I also had young kids and a wife, and so I never could party with Dennis like Dennis wanted me to. And I pulled him out of a few places very late at night, and generally kind of kept an eye on each other. I think I always felt like he had my back, especially on the court, and I certainly had his. But Dennis is a strange cat, and since we stopped playing together, I've hardly seen him or haven't spoken to him very much either. Believe it or not, he's sort of a shy, almost introverted bloke when he's not on the basketball court. I'd like to run into him one day. I enjoyed watching his Hall of Fame speech. I thought that was good.
Yeah, it was very touching, wasn't it?
Good to see him recognised, and he certainly deserves it. And what a unit. I mean, he talk about a guy who kept himself in amazing shape despite his sort of partying lifestyle, which was not exaggerated by the media at all. It was real. But he'd play a whole game, play 40 minutes or a 48-minute game, and then come back into the locker room and ride the bike for an hour, and then go and party till 4 o'clock in the morning. He was the most unprofessional professional you've ever seen.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I think in your book you detailed even where he might even had ice on his knees post-game, and yet he'd still be on the weight machine and doing things like that. So obviously he was very dedicated, and maybe some of the media might not have actually realised how great he was, even off the court, behind the scenes.
Yeah, he put a lot of time into his body, and he obviously spent a lot of time thinking about the game because he'd make plays that you don't make on instinct. You make plays on foresight and and basketball IQ, and he had both of those in spades.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you were front and centre to Rodman's headbutt of referee Ted Bernhardt back in March 96 in a game at New Jersey. Dennis was suspended for 6 games. Can you describe the situation on court and what you were trying to say to him and maybe what his emotions were in the locker room post-game?
Mate, I can't help you much with that one. I just remember being surprised by it. Like, he was always carrying on and chatting to the refs, and he was an emotional live wire. So I used to often wedge myself in the way and drag him away and tell him we had work to do and stuff like that. What I actually said that day, I don't remember, but whatever it was, it didn't work. So, and after the game, he would have been remorseful, and he would have thought he'd let us down, and he would have been cross with the ref. Dennis was the lucky dip of emotions. Probably all of the above. But I do remember being surprised and a bit cross with myself that I didn't prevent it, but there was no way of seeing it. And while it hurt us in some ways, it didn't hurt us in that we still got the job done. Dennis got to freshen up a little bit. Other guys got to get some minutes and get their game going. I mean, there's always a silver lining to every cloud like that.
Yeah, sure. Now, researching for our chat today, I learnt 2 interesting facts. Your Timberwolves played against the Chicago Bulls in a 1993 preseason game at New Mexico, and then to open the 97 preseason, the Chicago Bulls that you were part of played the Seattle Supersonics in a rematch of the 96 finals, also at New Mexico. So can you recall those preseason games and what sort of welcome that you received from the fans that saw you play college ball there at New Mexico?
Yeah, I can remember both those games. I remember getting dunked on by McIlvain, was that his name?
Yeah, Jim McIlvain, yeah.
McIlvain in Chicago in the pit, which I didn't like very much, but
I can understand that.
had great memories. I mean, great reception from the fans in the pit. They were, and even when I went back there not playing, they're very, very appreciative and loud. And I think that for them to see me run out in a Bulls uniform was pretty. I mean, I got an awful lot of fan mail and responses to that. That was a highlight, one of the highlights for me for sure.
Excellent. Now, I discussed this following incident with Bill Wennington when I had a chance to chat with him on the first episode of my podcast. In the 1997 season, you suffered a shoulder injury while you were surfing in LA or in California. Can you briefly talk about that incident and how you prepared to tell Phil Jackson actually what had happened?
Have you ever been in shock, mate? Proper shock?
Not particularly, no. Not to that.
Time goes fast and then slow and then it's fuzzy and you don't really remember much.
Yeah.
I just remember, I'm pretty sure I was in shock after that, and it wasn't pain of the shoulder because it didn't really hurt.
Yeah.
It was just shock around the situation, and I didn't prepare at all. I just called Phil and told him.
Just in trouble?
Yeah, I just said, mate, this is what's happened. And he said, well, I can't remember what he said. I do remember getting a note under my door, Luke, you're an effing idiot, Phil. And Michael wouldn't look me in the eye for about 2 weeks. But again, silver linings. I carried heavy tendonitis my whole career, and I got to rest up for 6 weeks, and my tendonitis improved. Mm-hmm. And I came back early. Didn't get the surgery, just let it rest. I still got the big bump on my shoulder to show for it. Yeah, look, it was embarrassing fronting the media about it. I tried to tell them I was shark wrestling. They didn't believe me.
Yeah.
It was one of those things, I think part of my NBA legacy is getting a couple of bad injuries. There's the scorpion bite. I know you've heard of that.
Yeah.
The shoulder. So, yeah, that's all I got to say on that subject.
No, fair enough. Now, in the 1997 NBA playoffs, in the second round against the Hawks, Game 5, you were being guarded by former teammate Christian Laettner, and you threw a really nifty bounce pass to MJ, who cut baseline and dunked over Mount Matumbo. Jordan got teed up when he was giving Dikembe a bit of the old finger wave in the play. What do you remember about that play, and do you have a favourite MJ moment that you were either part of like that or that you simply witnessed while you were playing with the Bulls?
Well, there's a three-pronged question. I don't actually remember that play I didn't remember it until you reminded me about it. Because it seemed like my whole life was throwing nifty bounce passes to MJ at that stage.
MJ. Oh, he did it! Michael shakes the finger. He got a technical, but he finally got his dunk on Mount Matumbo. And he's going to say after the game, well, it It took a long time, but it was worth it. Good post pass, and then a hard cut along the baseline. Terrific pass from Luc Longley.
My favourite MJ moment, it's hard to go past the Utah game where he stole the ball off Carl on the baseline and hit that crossover jumper and all that. But the one that I often tell that sums him up more, because everyone knows what a closer he is. Mm-hmm. But the thing one of the things that impressed me most about MJ was that he never, ever, ever took a game off. We could be playing the worst team in the league on the fourth game of a 5-day, fourth game in 5 days, and MJ was MJ. He wasn't half-ass MJ. He wasn't, I'm a bit sore, I'm going to play. He wanted to play all the game. He had an amazing appetite for competition. And I remember, I think he had a particular dislike or whatever it was, I don't know, competitive instinct against Kendall Gill.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Kendall was playing for the Nets at that stage, and we're in New Jersey, the same scenario. I think we'd been on the road for about 2 weeks. It was cold. We'd been playing a lot of games. And we had him down by, well, first of all, Michael dismantled Kendall in the first quarter, got him in foul trouble, might have had 30 at halftime. One of those sorts of Michael games when he should have been probably taking a break, Mm-hmm. And now it's the fourth quarter, and Phil tried to sit him, and he didn't want to sit, so he's playing in the fourth quarter up by whatever it was, 35 points. It was one of those games that was almost cruel, we were, instead of coming out of the game, Michael's prowling backwards and forwards in front of the New Jersey bench, asking guys to come out and have a go at guarding him, like, who's next? Which one of you wants some of this, And that may sound puerile, but it wasn't. It was Michael just genuinely, he loved beating guys. He loved winning basketball games, and it didn't matter to him who it was or when it was. He was the ultimate competitor in all situations, driving cars, playing cards, you name it, he was a competitor. But, in the NBA, it's a long season. You play 82 games, and, you get tired, and there's nights where you don't really get it done. Michael didn't have those nights. He didn't have injuries. He didn't have nights where he was second rate. He was always Michael Jordan, and to me, that's why he's Michael Jordan.
That's great to hear stories like that. I just love to soak up those sort of things whenever I have the chance to hear sort of information like that. Now, one more player I'd love to get your thoughts on is Scottie Pippen. He's one of the NBA's 50 greatest players. In my opinion, he's probably still not recognised as widely today as he should be, even though he's still held in great esteem. In 1994, his full season without MJ, he put up some great numbers on your Bulls team and also won the MVP in the All-Star game. What can you tell us about Pip and his importance to the Bulls franchise?
Well, I play with lots of good players, and Pip is my career greatest teammate. Sure. No doubt. He played both ends of the floor amazingly well. He never missed a rotation, never missed an assignment. If he saw that you were dragging ass a little bit and maybe missed an easy one or he'd make a point in the next play getting you the ball and keeping you going, or now and again you need to do the same for him. But he was a much more interactive teammate than Michael, much more aware of his teammates and genuinely cared about his teammates.
Yep.
Michael did too, but Scotty was more involved. And also the things he could do at 6'10". He could literally play 1 to 4. He could, you could play him at point today probably. I reckon he'd still go right. And you could put him defensively on anybody. He didn't get overpowered by many guys. He didn't get out quick by many guys. And I still think one of the most beautiful things there has ever been in the game of basketball, Scottie Pippen in transition. Just fluid with the ball, just long striding, long armed. I just think that was, once Scotty got out in transition, I just trot back the other way and take up residence in the defensive paint, because there was nothing going to stop Scotty in transition, and I don't think there ever will be.
Yeah, no, he's an absolutely fantastic player, so it's great to hear some insights there from a close teammate and friend. Now, even now, when I watch game DVDs of your career, I never tire of hearing the crowd chants of Luke. Every time you seem to get introduced or you might make a shot, they'll start doing the Luke chant. Can you recall when and where that chant first started?
First started in New Mexico when I was playing in Albuquerque, okay. And it sort of followed me into Chicago. Anyway, a little bit in Minnesota when I had my good moments. I think people, fans like to make that noise, whether it's boo or Luke or whatever it is. It's just an easy noise to make loud. Yeah. But it did upset a couple of people from Australia who didn't really know what was going on and came into the stadium and thought that I was being booed, even though I was doing well. I used to love it. Used to give me a rush. I used to, I guess you never expect to have that many people chanting your name, and when it happens, it's pretty good. It was, I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Now, it's excellent. Now, as a pioneer for players who aspire to reach the highest level, you were part of a Bulls team that had an incredible international appeal, not just due to MJ and Pippen, obviously, but you represented Australia. You had Tony Kukoc from Croatia, Bill Wennington, Canada. Did it help playing with a team that had some players who were also experiencing life in the NBA that was similar to you?
Yeah, it did help that for sure. And I think there was already starting to be more and more internationals in the NBA at that stage, but I think we were pretty heavy on internationals and on that team. And I think that was also part of what made us appealing, but also the style of basketball we played really suited international players. So I like to think that we paved the way a little bit for more internationals, and now there's a flood of them, obviously.
Yeah, sure. Prior to playing a single minute in the NBA, Andrew Bogut made a few disparaging remarks about yourself that upset many basketball fans, me included. Can you recall first hearing those comments, and how has that since impacted on your relationship with him?
I do remember hearing them. I remember being disappointed, obviously, and I think right closely behind that was amused, because I remember being a 19, 20-year-old kid who thought I was going to take over the world with my game, and having agents whispering in my ear and people saying, you're great. And so what I saw was a young bloke trying to pump up his own tyres, and I understood that. I guess I was a little bit annoyed, but more than that, I actually felt bad for Andrew at the time, because I thought, as you say, probably upset a few people, and so it really upset me so much. And I only got to meet him recently in the last 12 months. And I raised it with him, and he apologised, and there's no hangover from it as far as I'm concerned. And I think he's probably, I actually agreed with him. What he said wasn't actually incorrect, that he was a much more complete player and a very different kettle of fish to me. He just probably said it in the wrong manner. And he's also probably learned over the years that it's hard to win a championship, and that those things count for something as well. I do like his Golden State team at the moment. They're fun to watch, and when he gets going again, he'll add something to those guys. And, all that's history as far as I'm concerned. He's an Australian in the NBA, and I want him to do well.
Good to hear. Now, speaking of the NBA of today, do you have a particular team that you're still hoping does well? Obviously, the Bulls, I guess, play a big part, but...
Yeah, look, I used to always follow Phil's teams, so obviously I followed the Lakers because I have a very close relationship with Phil. And then when guys were still playing, like when Scotty was playing with Portland, I watched them. But there's not many guys left in the league now from when I was playing. Yeah. So now it's back to Chicago. Chicago's really the team that I want to see do well. I do like the Spurs for their doggedness, and they do things well. And Brett Brown's there. And I like watching Oklahoma City. They're a fun team to watch. When it comes down to it, I'm a Bulls fan. I can't help that.
Totally understandable, given you're a link to the franchise. In 2012, in January, at the G'day USA, there was a black tie gala where Phil Jackson honoured you with a great introductory speech. It's clear to see the impact that you've had on your contemporaries and coaches. You've achieved a great deal throughout your career. Looking back, can you believe your basketball resume?
Yeah, mate. That's funny. I had this question this conversation with my wife last night, and the conversation went something along the lines of what is being famous? What's a good? How do you recognise that? And I suppose you look at your resume and you say, well, yeah, it's actually a pretty good resume. While you're doing it, you don't. This is a really awkward answer, clumsy answer. I suppose I'm very proud of it. While I was doing it just seemed like what I was doing. And then you look back now, and I suppose also this is actually a better answer. As an athlete, you're naturally inclined to look at your weaknesses. Your coaches tend to look at your weaknesses. You tend to be hyper aware of what you can't do because that's the stuff you work on. And certainly by the end of my career, I was much more aware of the things I couldn't do than the things I had done or could do. And it takes a while to forget the things that you couldn't do and remember the good things. So when you hear someone say, what a nice resume, or if someone honours you at G'day USA, it's nice to actually reflect back and go, yeah, they're right. That was pretty good. And I suppose that's where I'm at now in life, where I look back and say, yeah, that was pretty good. It hasn't always been that way. There's been times when I was disappointed in myself, and the Phoenix years were bad, and New York with an injury and all that, so that clouds it. But yeah, mate, I certainly never, ever dreamed it would be the resume would be anything like it is when I started out. So there's a very long, awkward answer to a good question.
No problems at all. It's good to hear a bit of background there, and you're obviously a pioneer for all Australian players going forward, because you sort of set the bar for everybody else that's now following. Now, outside the game of basketball, I know you have an affinity with marine life and our environment. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and what motivates you?
Yeah, I suppose with the marine environment, I grew up in it. My grandfather was a marine pilot. My uncle and my uncle was America's Cup yachtsman. I grew up on the water. I was into fishing and diving before I was into basketball. It was just always attracted me. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I brought my kids back to live in Perth is you can still, although these days there's a few big scary monsters in the water, but you can always go for a dive and get a crayfish or a lobster. You can chip abalone at the right time of year. You can catch fish. I like the fact that the coastline here is still pretty clean and usable, and you can eat out of it. And I'm proud of that. I think that's sort of part of what I grew up in. It's part of what I think makes Perth, and in today's environment, it's getting rarer and rarer. So, yeah, I've done a fair bit of marine conservation stuff, and I'll continue to do that. And I've made some good friends doing it, and my friends and family have got involved with me doing it. And I suppose it just comes naturally. That's the answer.
Yeah, and I thought it was just important to bring it up here. When I've been doing a bit of research about you, about what you're up to these days, it just seemed like it was a pretty prominent part of what you're up to as well. So that's why I did ask that one. Now, I've just got two more quick questions for you, if you don't mind, and then we'll wrap things up.
No worries.
Now, I have to ask Luke, Twitter. Are you going to join fellow Aussie hoop heroes and pals like Andrew Gaze, Shane the Hammer Heel, and Mark Bradkey by joining us on Twitter?
No, mate, my phone's broken. It doesn't do Twitter. I don't know why. And I've also got a dentist appointment I've got to get to before. I just always think, it doesn't work like that.
No, fair enough.
I thought I was doing pretty well by getting you on Skype.
I reckon. I'm very impressed. I thought I'd be speaking to you through the on your mobile phone, and that was it. But to be able to see you in person and chat face to face, it's just mind blowing. So it's been awesome. I've just got one more quick question for you. I'll let you get back to your normal devices, and I won't stalk you any longer.
No worries.
Before we wrap things up, can you just describe your current involvement with the Australian Boomers and the basketball team there?
Well, my current involvement with the Boomers is one of great interest to me. I have recently started getting involved with basketball again after a long hiatus, and it's unclear what my role will be. Depends on who they choose as coach, and I'll certainly put my opinions forward as to who they should be the coach. It won't be me, obviously, because I'm not a basketball coach, but I really, really enjoyed working with Brett Brown and the coaching staff in the lead up to the recent games and getting amongst the young guys of the sport. I mean, they were really receptive and respectful, and I think I had a positive influence on the group. So my relationship with basketball and with the Boomers and the Opals, I'm going to grow it, and just have to sort of softly see the best way to do that without treading on any toes. And I had a ball. And as I said, our national program is sort of the fraternity I grew up in. It's a very comfortable place, and I like to give something back to it going forward.
No, great. Now, Luke, it's been an honour to chat to you today. Congratulations on an amazing career, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavours.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. Great questions. Really, it's fun for me to talk about that stuff because it doesn't happen every day these days. I'm a long way from that, so I enjoyed it.
That's excellent. Thanks. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter @inallairness. Please visit the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.